Welcome, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the final session in the main auditorium here today, called User Interfaces, or User Trust and Control Privacy Interfaces. My name is Niamh Sweeney, and I'm the head of public policy for Facebook Ireland, based out of our international headquarters here in Dublin. My background, however, is in journalism. I spent 5 years as a broadcaster at Ireland's National Public Service Broadcaster, RTE, which for a long time meant that my job indulged me in my favourite activity, which is asking questions. And that, more than my current job, is really why I'm here today, because we're at a time, or a point in time now, where Facebook, like many people, is starting to ask some pretty fundamental questions around the themes of user trust, transparency, and control. However, we know at Facebook that we can't come up with the answers by ourselves, and that goes some way to explaining how the four of us have all ended up on stage here together. This is my friend MC Schreifel over here. This is the kind of outside-the-box activity you might expect from MC over the course of the next hour. So this is a multidisciplinary group of people, backgrounds in engineering, architecture, business strategy, behavioral science, physics, design, you name it. And it's all on stage here today. And they are bringing the best of each of those disciplines to the table as they each, in their own unique way, try to address what essentially boils down to this. How can we break with the status quo and try to create a whole new normal when it comes to privacy, consent, and the business models that rely on those things? But seeing as this is an exercise that is largely about trust, we figured that to get things going, we might engage in a little trust exercise. The first one involves me. It's going to get me out of my comfort zone and involve me placing my trust in somebody else. And the next one's going to involve all of you. So the other thing I didn't mention is that also on the stage here is a kettlebell instructor. She's a chartered engineer, she's a physicist, she's a computer science and behavioral scientist, but she also knows how to lift people in this sort of way. So I'm just going to get, oh my God, this is pretty outside my comfort zone. Wow, Jesus Christ. Yeah, we didn't think through the dismount, did we? Yeah, so that's that. Now she wants you all to get on your feet. Thank you, MC. That wasn't for me, it was for her, wasn't it? So now I'm going to hand over to MC before we get rid of the rest of it. Everybody up. Come on, it's last session. That grab-and-go lunch, that lovely sandwich and a packet of crisps is just around the corner. It's all waiting for you if we just get through this.
We wanted to give you a gift because we recognize that, first of all, this is a Friday. You're here instead of outside on a Friday, and this is the last session of the whole thing. So that you are still here is a fantastic thing, considering that this is time, and these moments, we never get them back. So thank you very much for trusting us to give you something valuable. So since you've probably been very city over the past 2 days, we'd like to give you something that you can take away with you from this session, if not fantastic knowledge from the folks here, at least something that will change your life and make it better. If you do this every day, you will discover bones you never knew you had. So this is really a very ancient movement from Qinggao, a Chinese martial art, and its English name is the teacup. And you have to imagine a movement that is enabling you to navigate through a very busy space and not spill any tea. And the reason I've asked to use this particular exercise with us is because most of us who are knowledge workers who work at desks end up our days looking something like this. Right? That is the position that in the trade we might call protect the squishy bits. It's a reflexive option in which, as we get tired, our bodies cave in on themselves to effectively protect us while we start to lose consciousness. It's also a threat defense posture because we get like this if somebody's kicking us, and sometimes work can feel like that, and so can the end of the day. So this is an antidote to that, to help, as I say, open up the body. So you're taking a little bit of trust. I'm going to show you what to do first, and then we can do it together, those of you who feel safe and comfortable exploring your upper spine or the thoracic spine. So that's a new word for your next cocktail party. thoracic spine. It's from below the base of the neck to the bottom of the ribs. That's your thoracic spine. And again, we can move it this way, but most of us have some difficulty moving it back and forth or around. So this will help with that. So the teacup in 2 hands. We'll start with one hand.
Trust. You got to place your trust in MC.
So I'll show you this first. All it is a movement like so, and you have to imagine there's a teacup on your hand that you don't want to spill the tea. That's it. So I'll take you through it. So if everybody put out a hand towards you, the first place we're going to bring it to is our hip. Real simple so far, keeping the tea upright. Then we're going to shove the hand kind of to the back. Excellent, and it's good that you're bending. This is great. Use your spine as much as possible. Then we're kind of going to salute backwards. So keeping the hand up, move your spine or your body so that you can get this over your head, and then, ta-da, serving it to somebody you love.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you.
There you go.
Well done. Lads, thanks very much for playing along. We just thought it would be good to get up out of the seats and MC.
You can invert it. I just want to tell you, we'll not do it, we'll not spend the time, but you can play with this. You can do it with the other hand, too. You can do it the other direction. And you can do it two-handed. Just for your future. Sorry, go ahead.
MC, I feel like we're really only scratching the surface there with that one, but we'll
That's okay.
We'll get into the business of the day. So
Don't you feel like you got something already, but don't leave yet.
Yeah.
We have some work to do now.
And we really are. We're delighted to have so many of you here today. Much and all as this looks like a downgrade from Vint Cerf's turnout, but actually Vint Cerf and I have a lot in common. He founded the internet. I use the internet. I mean, kind of a big deal. So I really feel like this is really rounding this out today. And that's my friend Suzanne there in the front row. I'm pretty sure I know the rest of you. So for the 10 of you who don't know anybody here, thanks a million. MC, I'm going to start with you. You are a professor of computer science and human performance at the University of Southampton.
Yes.
How did you end up here talking about consent and privacy and user control and trust?
We would have to get into a real trust relationship to get into the details of
We're
that.
in it. Love, you just carried me
so,
across the
so
stage.
just to make it safe, within this space, if you put computers together with people and how we perform at our best, as we just explored with that movement, the precursor to that movement was something I was saying was the protect the squishy bits, us going into threat. We do that reflexively. Our nervous system puts us into a threat place if we don't feel safe. And the internet's a really wonderful place, but some of the places where we do not feel safe is around potentially who has our data, how we share our data everywhere, but not necessarily where we would like it to be or where we expect it to be. We don't know where it's going or how it's being processed. That can make a gal very nervous. So some of the things we've been looking at is how can we explore this from both a human-centered design perspective, which is part of our lab, and also from this other part of our lab, which is how can we take the weight off the user from always having to engage with these trusting processes to enable some agent, a software device, to act on our behalf, to actually offload or third party some of that work to a trusted resource, doesn't have to be human, but it needs to be human informed, that can manage the scale and the complexity of this for us and can automate that for us. So that's the user side. We've been interested, I'm getting into solutions which you didn't want to get into right this yet. You asked how we got here. So it's really pain. It's about certain levels of pain and threat and discomfort, and having this belief that it's at least worth checking out how you can use technology, if it's causing the pain, to potentially help reduce that pain. I'm all about pain reduction and joy, so that's that.
And I'm also hanging by a thread. So let's get to the practical application of this. So you lead a team of researchers who are all working on the Meaningful Consent Project. What is that?
I hope it's sort of like what it says on the tin, is that right now, and I'm sure everyone here is going to talk a little bit about how the internet currently makes us lie. That when we look at terms and conditions anytime and you say, yes, I've read it, it's like, no, you probably haven't, because life is too short. And so given that, if you don't read the terms and conditions, you can't really have, you can give consent, but it's not meaningful because you haven't engaged in it. So that's one level in which we're looking at how can we actually make this process meaningful, that people give consent, it does mean something, and you have an agreement, and that works for any party within that exchange. So it's not just an individual citizen, it might be a corporate person who wants to use the data and know that people trust them to do that, and so on. So that's the part of the meaningful bit within a consent model. And so we're looking at trying to look at the whole piece of how do you sustain that so that it is deployable, scalable, will work not only in today's models, but will scale up to work for the Internet of Things, the Internet of Vehicles, the Internet of whatever, connected planets, and so on.
Yeah, and we'll come back to, so the Meaningful Design, or Meaningful Consent project rather, has been up and running since 2014, so you've got 3 years of work to look at, so I think we might come back later in the conversation to look at what have you found out so far and how are you going to take it forward. But I think one of the themes you just touched on there around terms and consent, or terms and conditions rather, is one of the things you talk about, Sarah. Sarah Gold, you're the founder of Projects by If. It's a design company looking to address some of the problems that we've already touched on. You have a background in architecture. But you've said in the past, terms and conditions is a broken design pattern. Can you talk us through how you ended up coming to stumble across this problem as well, and the way you, through design, try and approach it?
So, hello. Great to have you join us, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel. I run a design studio. We're made up of technologists, developers, and designers, and we help teams to build services that people can trust. And we think that's really important because so many of the products and services we use today don't look at trust as an important issue. And what we'd like to do is help design teams, development teams to think about trust, security, and privacy in the ways that we think about accessibility now. I think it would be, it is not considered good practice to build a product or service that's inaccessible. And I'd like to see that for privacy and security moving forward. I got into this space really from the point of view of digital rights. I've been really interested in the rights we should have as citizens. I think so often we're treated as consumers, and that's across more and more of the services we use. And that model is entering our home into some of the most intimate spaces of our life. And that, for me, felt wrong. And at the time, I don't think these issues were being addressed from the perspective of people. Largely, they were being addressed through the perspective of technology. And so that's why I started IF.
Yeah, and you have raised the point that time and time again, industry has shown people that they aren't worthy of people's trust. And I think you've got some examples to show sort of great products that just under a bit of analysis really didn't stand up to the user trust test that you've spoken about.
So over the last year, I've been looking at, I've been speaking about how the things we make don't provide people trust. And these are some examples of those. So my friend Kayla is a doll, and it has been banned in Germany as a surveillance device. We've then got IQ, which was investigated at the same time by the Norwegian Consumer Council. That's another surveillance device that we're giving children. But we're not just making tracking devices for kids, we're making them for grown-ups too, like the Samsung Smart TV that within the privacy policy said anything you say in front of your smart TV may be recorded for and sent to third parties for voice recognition services. So you have to be careful about what you say in front of your TV because it's going to gossip more than your next door neighbor. And then we've got objects like Alexa that we're buying. We are buying these products for our home. They're becoming ever more complex. and it is impossible to understand what's happening to any of the data that these objects are collecting. And in fact, the patterns that these products use take away any opportunity we have to ask questions about them, because we sign away any of our rights to do so through the data sharing agreements we apparently agree to. Like Apple's terms and conditions for iTunes. How many of you in the audience use iTunes? Hands up. How many of you have read the terms and conditions?
Only once.
So that's one hand, 2 hands, 3 hands, 4 hands out of all of you, which is quite not surprising, because you'd need 2 hours to read them and a law degree. And I think at the moment, the patterns we're asking people to understand, to engage with, rob us of rights we have to security, to privacy, and it's just not good enough anymore. We need patterns that empower people, that help to put people in control, and that's what I hope to sort of speak about in a moment, about how we are beginning to do that.
Yeah, and of course, we're not just hating on Apple. There's a whole raft of companies, my own included, who have very complex, long terms and conditions, and a lot of that is to do with the very legalistic focus on compliance, rather than some of the other ways we might approach this problem through true understanding and sort of degrees of control around privacy, so we can reach that sweet spot that Helen Dixon spoke about yesterday.
And that's really the design at the moment, that these issues, when you're building a service, these are issues that you have to engage with at the end, once you're about to ship. So your service has to go through kind of compliance or legal departments, and you end up with opt-ins or opt-outs, terms and conditions, other sort of patterns we're all very familiar with. And they're kind of gatekeepers to you being able to ship a service. Actually, what we need to be seeing is data as a material, as part of the service, looking at these as holistic issues. And I'm going to stop because I know you wanted to...
Well, I think we'll come back to that later in the conversation. But so the third member of our panel here is Liz. She's the CEO of Control Shift, which is a very specialized consultancy which is focused on the personal information economy. So I think one of the things you've highlighted is that the sort of underlying business premise for the internet, that is digital advertising, is a broken model, but your company is focused on new models. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you came to be looking at it from that perspective and how you would define the problem as you see it.
I have to say, before I talk about where we've come from, if the only business model we can think of that the internet offers us is advertising, we are a failed race, I would say. This is ridiculous. This is an amazing tool, and all we can think about doing is advertising. What is that all about?
It's not what we can think about doing. It's what advertisers think about doing.
Well, we'll come back to whose fault it is.
Anyway, the point is so many people rely on advertising for the business model and that.
Yes.
But go back to where we came from. So we founded the business 8 years ago, on the premise that the hypothesis that the digital economy, although it wasn't called the digital economy at the time, would create so many digital devices, these things, smart watches, smart shoes, smart things in our bodies, on our bodies, underwear, etc., lovely, that would produce huge amounts of data. So this was the hypothesis 8 years ago, and that data would become increasingly personal, and therefore would necessitate a different type of information sharing relationship between the individual and the people that were going to use that data. So that was the premise on which we were working, and therefore we went out and engaged with businesses on how that would change. And I have to say, on the whole, the response was, pick a window you're leaving, because that's my data, and those consumers are never going to have that data. They're going to have no control over that data, no access to it. It's mine. So thanks very much, but no. During the first 4 or 5 years of Control Shift, we mostly worked with the World Economic Forum, regulators, legislators, governments, influencers of the market, to start to look at how we design a digital economy where that data could flow through a trusted information sharing relationship. And we had quite a lot of, we were the business advisors to the My Data program in the UK, which in the end derived into a piece of primary legislation in the UK. So there's already some legislation on statute book in the UK, but that then became part of the GDPR. So I don't say it to too many business people, because again, I might be told to pick a window, I'm leaving. That work actually ended up being in GDPR and has had a big influence on that. And by the way, on Payment Services Directive 2, if anybody knows about that, and open banking, of course. So that was that, and we were mostly a think tank then. We were looking at market, we were analysing the market to look at what the influences were and how it would shape up. And indeed, we did a piece on terms and conditions where we compared 200 companies' terms and conditions to see how readable they were and sharing of data they were. So we've done a huge amount of work on that. And then about 2 years ago, maybe 3 now, the market started to shift. And we evolved into a strategic consultancy business. The shift was, I remember the shift, the moment it shifted was we were asked to go and see the board of a supermarket. These people, you know, they have the most data about us. And we were going in to talk about empowering individuals with that data. And I thought, it's going to be another pick a window, you're leaving moment. But actually, we were given a quarter of an hour, and they spent an hour and a quarter with us on the fact that this is the only way that we can go. We are going to empower people with the data because that offers a new trusted relationship. We need access to that data, and they need access to that data to create the value. So we worked with Facebook, and have been working on the Springboard project, which has created the papers that you've seen that are around and about, but also derived into the Design Jam. So we helped Facebook design the Design Jam, which we'll probably talk about as well later on. We also work with O2 on their GDPR program, so we've helped them design, we've been leading the design of how to implement GDPR, which also includes how do you systematize the policies and processes so that you actually do design in at the beginning trust and transparency. So we work with them, we work with banks, insurance companies, comparison services, energy companies, all sorts, retailers. In and around this space, we basically look at designing trusted digital services, trusted digital experiences, customer data strategy, and GDPR programs and how to implement legislation. So that's us.
And of course, you've said in the past, you think, and this might sound scary for a lot of the people in the room, because we've had a lot of questions of how does it work and how can I be compliant over the last 24 hours, but you've said that you believe that the GDPR can be a competitive differentiator for businesses. And I think that's what's prompted a lot of the new thinking. People know they're going to have to change their processes, they're going to have to change the way they think about things, and that's been true of us at Facebook as well. So that actually explains how these 3 individuals, and many more besides them, have come to be involved in a project that's, like I said at the outset, really about trying to move away from the status quo and design a whole new normal for how we think about trust, transparency, and control, all put in the hands of the users. And so all 3 of them and their organizations have been involved in the early stages of what we've been calling a design jam. And I think the best way to introduce the notion of a design jam is to show you the first one that we ran a couple of months ago in Berlin with the University of Southampton, with Control Shift, with some of Sarah's colleagues from Projects by IF, and any number of other organizations, regulators, policymakers, who all went into a room together. And this is a little taste of what happened in Berlin.
Click.
Gar, that's your cue there. Remember we talked about a verbal cue for the video? That was it. Good man.
We're trying to create idea solutions or even just better questions that we should ask about trust, privacy, and control.
The challenge we're trying to solve can't be solved by any one group of people. Having spent many years thinking about transparency and control, I think we can learn so much from the design community in using design principles to address the sorts of problems that very often we're trying to solve in the policy arena.
And especially a jam like this, in a design jam, we don't just jump into solutions right away. People would get out and do research.
Normally, our remit is talking to politicians and regulators about legal texts. It's very interesting to interact with people who actually solve problems.
We looked at all the data that we gathered and tried to figure out, so what are the key insights?
The most surprising thing is how many ideas we could generate from a very seemingly tough challenge.
Design can actually turn those really interesting ideas into things that people can use and people like using and meet the needs of those people.
They're coming up with solutions and also visuals that I would have never even thought of. And in fact, they're coming to that even before I tell them this is what the law says.
We would take all these ideas and not just have an opinion on that, but actually build them and test them just between the teams that were on site, but that's not enough. So we actually invited people from all over Germany to dial in again.
This is not a kind of top-down thing. Whenever something is developed in these discussions, it's being tested on the ground.
I think the most challenging thing is actually getting rid of the preconceptions. I'm already in solution mode. I think I know the answers and I want to get there. But in fact, my answers are not necessarily right, and people keep challenging them. And therefore, I actually start going different route.
I'm used to sort of, I guess, doing it with a bunch of designers and not with kind of people from, you know, legal or people from compliance, and that's just brilliant.
I hope I'll be taking some of their stuff away back to the ICO in terms of ways that we can implement what data protection legislation says in ways that users are going to enjoy and like and understand.
Regulators and legislators are starting to understand that there are alternatives to how digital services can actually manage people's data and offer individuals trust, transparency and control is such an enabler for the economies within which they operate.
That's sort of high fives, chest bumps. It's all part of the Facebook vibe. You get used to it after a while. But MC, none of this, of course, will come as any surprise to you because your team has been working on the notion of meaningful consent for the last 3 years, and you've sort of built a roadmap for how to move things forward based on the research you've conducted over the last 3 years. What are the main pillars of that research, and how do they translate into making people more comfortable with the use of data?
Sure. The thing, we'll come on to the roadmap. One of the things I just wanted to touch on is, first of all, it's delightful to see that, because knowing that my students were actually where they said they were is very validating. And yeah, we did develop a roadmap from a couple of workshops, and as Liz is talking about the number of stakeholders involved, and the design jams show again that you can't just do this in a room with a couple of academics wanking about what they think the design should be that is going to support a good process. We're very good at that, of saying we know what the answers are. But what this shows is the influence of design thinking, a concept that Stanford's been famous for in terms of saying we're all effectively engaged in a design process. And when we get around doing design thinking, putting the human in the center and asking what do we really want to achieve with this ecology or this ecosystem, then we start to come up with these unexpected challenges and solutions. And that's kind of what we've been trying to do with this notion of what's a consent roadmap. And from that, we want to take a definition. What's consent versus privacy? And one of the main things, without getting into the depth of privacy, which you guys have all been talking about a lot, is to see consent as a mechanism to enable degrees of privacy to be mediated, to be operationalized, so that somebody can make a decision about sharing something. And even before I say what these pillars are for the roadmap, or what the highways are, or whatever the analogy is going to be for that, I keep thinking, though, you know, consent on the internet right now, in terms of the status quo, is really the unicorn of the internet, or one of the unicorns of the internet, because even as I think about these great mechanisms we think we're developing around using agent-based technology to anticipate scale so that one person only has to say, these are the kind of things I prefer, and then their consent can be managed automatically and autonomously for them so that they can review that kind of policy. How well has this agent been acting on my behalf? I want to take this back or change this. What we can't really be like, what are we consenting to? Right now, what we consent to, it seems, is the terms and conditions of the moment, as opposed to understanding the future flow and how these bits of data might be amalgamated with other services to come up with information that we have no idea about. That is a black hole and probably a black art. And that's why I'm saying when I'm starting to feel really queasy about suggesting that anything I'm doing is helping with actually enabling meaningful consent, because it's sort of meaningful up to what point? After which it is a completely wrong leap of faith to say, I can't see the harm this might be doing to me, so what? Go ahead, have at it. So with that leap of faith into not quite a black hole, because I understand from the physics you do get really narrow and nasty in that space. But
I'm going to pull you back from the physics black hole now, yeah.
If we leap forward into this mishmash of what consent could possibly be, the place that we're trying to look at is around where does business come in to this play? How can we articulate models, not to punish people for trying to make money, but to do it fairly and equitably, which might mean considering how do we negotiate as opposed to simply accept terms in a one-way interchange. There's also the notion of the citizen within that, and as you were saying, I think very rightly, in that I agree with you, therefore you must be right, is that this is what I mean about designers, you can get in a room and think, yes, of course you agree with me, therefore we are both right. Is that, do you ever self-reflect like that and just think, I'm just going to go for coffee?
Come back to me, MC. Come back to me, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So we have citizens in there. We also have technology as part of that, because how we design technology to support these concepts of business and citizen is really important. And we also have the legal system and advocacy within that, so the policy piece within that. There's another one, but these are really the ones I think that we want to focus on right now, is the sense of the citizen in the discussion and why we want to frame citizens in a context of social action and influence in terms of what a business is able to do based on what a citizen will engage in or accept or expect. The legal framework around that, the technology to enable that. A lot of the questions around enabling GDPR, it's like, yeah, we got a solution for that. We can handle that, but is that what we want to be doing? Are these the models that we want to be talking about? Those are probably the most important bits that we'd like feedback on.
And is it ultimately about finding sort of degrees of okayness with use of your data? So you talk about consent as a mechanism and trying to personalize that to suit the needs of each individual, but also trying to do that at scale. Because you've made the point that a lot of times when people understand what's happening with their data and you give it to them in the round and you explain the potential risks and the potential benefits, they become much more comfortable with it. And I suppose each of us, some of us are more risk averse, totally risk averse, no doubt. And others are willing to sort of take a leap into the unknown, but you've got to customize for that. Because, I mean, there are lots of unobjectionable ways to use data that you've said that people find creepy now because they don't understand it. How do you get to that level of understanding?
I don't even know if I'm at this level of understanding, because as I say, there's a point at which you just can't see. Part of the thing about I think the design pattern work about good design in general is that you don't have to be aware of it, that it's happening. We were talking previously about the fact that we see these little S's against HTTPS now. You don't see any different web experience, but what that S actually signifies is that there's an encryption going on so that your data is not being able to be observed by an external third party. Nobody really has to know how that mechanism works. It's just working, it's successful, and it's necessary for people to engage in trust. I often wonder, as a thought exercise, what would happen if encrypted exchanges were not there for people to have financial exchanges? How many would happen? Would they still kind of trust it because they want that thing from Amazon that they're purchasing, and so they're willing to take a risk that their data might get hacked at that point? I don't know, but it's like, and just to answer your question, I think, or approximate an answer to your question, is I think that if we are doing a good job in terms of design, capturing those opportunities within respecting legal frameworks, social mores, to deliver services that people want, that becomes transparent. It does not have to be something that people need to think about because their normal expectations are enabled. The creepy part is the dissonance when you find out that what you thought was happening, like I'm just moving from website to website, happy me, my privacy, my history of what I'm doing is my own, and then you show somebody that no, everything you're doing here, every little tweet you make is exposed, and it's telling somebody an awful lot about yourself and who you affiliate with and so on. That's the creepiness that comes from not misunderstanding, because everybody understands what stalking is. It comes from the thing not working the way you were led to believe as a reasonable person this exchange was happening. So I think we as designers have a real opportunity in this space to find mechanisms to better align the expectation of civil practice with actual exchange.
And Sarah, you and your team of designers have already been looking at this. Of course, we're not there yet. There was no big reveal at the end of the Design Jam video saying we cracked it in one attempt. We've had another Design Jam in Paris. We have another one happening in Brussels next week. It's an iterative process, but you're already in the middle of that iterative process and you've come up with some new design patterns. Are they the answer, or are they part of the way to getting to the answer?
So design patterns, just to unpick that jargon, a design pattern is a it's a repeatable solution to a common problem. So a pattern could be like a cookie banner, or for instance, terms and conditions that we've been speaking about a lot. Those patterns are across the web, and at the moment, if you are designing a service and someone asks you to put a payments platform into a service that you're providing, you'd probably go and look at, say, Tesco's supermarket checkout, because that maybe is the last thing you used last night when you did your online order. You'd probably also look at payment services that you enjoy elsewhere, and you'd take aspects of those patterns and put them into the thing you were designing. So you kind of, as a designer, you copy bits that you see across the web and you bring them together. At the moment, for empowering patterns around data sharing, we really don't have very many. So if you're a designer or a developer or a product owner or anyone involved in delivering a service and you want to bring digital rights into the things you make, that's pretty hard, because you're going to have to take some time out to investigate those potential solutions, pilot them, test them, and that might not fit along the roadmap that you have to deliver that service. So what we're trying to do is bring those patterns together, say that these are issues for design, and through that we hope create repeatable patterns that others can contribute to too. So something that was just mentioned was about design fading into the background, and I think there's a real tension point that we are headed to at the moment, which is that at sometimes, there are different schools of thought about design, and I think that HTTPS is a really, really good example of where it's important for privacy, or really security, not to get in the way of an experience. It's really important at times that you can do things quickly. But there are other examples where we actually need to build speed bumps into the experience. That's quite hard because it goes against the grain of these immediate experiences we've been taught to expect from the internet. So a speed bump being, can we go back to my slide is up. These have changed. Anyway, a speed bump being something that will potentially slow you down during an experience so that you can question what's happening. So the example up on the screen is something that we've been looking at from GDPR. So we looked at GDPR as a series of as a series of new digital rights, and looked at each of those and looked at how you could bring those into like an experience that someone would be using. So I'm going to try and, there we go. So this is an example. These are just sketches. So this looks at your right to question an automated decision that's been made about you. And this shows potentially that kind of slowing down. So we're looking at a kind of Google Maps scenario where you're traveling, in this example, from Herringate to Southend-on-Sea. And you're doing that to insure yourself for that journey, because we were looking at potentially where insurance might be going to insure you for single journeys. And you get a quote back for £26.50. You think, that's quite a lot of money. It doesn't normally cost that much. And the interesting part of this, and this isn't kind of, rocket science, this is really about micro interactions for trust. The important thing here is you can query that quote. You can understand where the quotes come from. And you can see, and fair enough, these examples might be quite extreme, but the roads are wet. Most accidents happen on wet roads, the time of day you're traveling, the road you're traveling on. And fair enough, in this example, you may then choose not to travel at that time at all because you just think, the risk is too high. But what you can do there is say, well, actually, your API is looking at the wrong Southend-on-Sea, like where I am is beautifully sunny, it's not wet. And we didn't design the next part of that service, but this looks at if you took GDPR as an opportunity to innovate the kind of services you provide and the empowerment for users. These are the kind of patterns that you could be looking at. Another one we looked at was around the accountability of algorithms. And again, this is showing you, as a user, the ability to understand how a decision has been made and object to it. Because things will go wrong. And when code gets more complicated and we start using kind of black boxes like algorithms, even more complicated code, we still need the ability to question and object to decisions that have been made. And so this interface, which I'm going to go to the next example because I know Liz wants to speak as well. Another pattern that I think is really interesting that is one that's supported by gov.uk. This is about the driving license code. So when you go and hire a car abroad, previously you've had to share your whole driving license. And that means you're sharing other information about yourself that that car company probably doesn't need to know. Similar situations when you have to prove your age when you go out, which I still need to do, so I can vouch for that. But this is interesting because it gives you the ability to have a shareable code. So you can get a code to share your driving license for 21 days. So being able to prove facts rather than share data are also interesting patterns. And I think that these are the kind of bits of services we should be seeing more of that help users understand what's happening to information, but also put them in greater control of who gets to access what. And I'm going to stop because I want Liz to have time.
Well, I think it's a good segue into, Liz, you spend a lot of time talking about, like I said, how GDPR can be a competitive differentiator. But let's say we take the research that MC has been doing and we take the designs that Sarah's been working on and we do create a system where trust is built into it. What are the real opportunities for businesses there? How can we move away from the sell an ad, click on it, maybe not click on it.
Yeah, let's get away from advertising, shall we? Yeah.
But what are the other opportunities that are out there? How do they move from where Sarah and MC have described that sort of greater trust and control?
Once we manage to get businesses past the either I'm really, really worried about this or I'm really, really excited about it because it's moving really fast, once we manage to get past that and we get into what can we do, there are massive opportunities to use the information in collaboration with individuals to help individuals to manage, for instance, their journey more effectively, their digital journey, and in fact their offline journey. So a really simple example is, and in doing that, that's the individual, but in doing that, making businesses really efficient. So really an easy example, my mobile operator, I'm not going to say who it is because they're all the same. I've got a problem trying to use my phone internationally. There's something wrong with the package that I'm on, whatever it is. Go online, try and fix it, spend an hour, can't fix it. Phone up the help desk, spend half an hour waiting for them to answer. I have to go through the whole process right from the very beginning because they have no information about what I've been doing on the website at all. They don't look at that. I mean, we talk about this stuff all flowing, but it's not flowing. It's not flowing into their processes. So how about, actually, I let them see what I've been doing, and we can start from where I left off on the online journey, because actually what happens is you phone up and they say, right, okay, you've got to do this, and you've got to go to the website. It's like, I've just been on the website. This is just too horrible. So, and there I am. I've spent huge amounts of my time. I've spent huge amounts of their time. They then, if they can see that journey and work out what's going on, they can actually start to fix some of this stuff. So I'm not spending loads of time on the phone with them. So there's massive efficiencies that you can push into businesses that enable using this data, but using it transparently with individuals. So then there's new services. We call these personal information management services, PIMS, and we can create new revenue streams. So we're working with quite a lot of companies looking at how to create these PIMS. I'll give you one example. I can't talk about the name of the company. It's so frustrating because a lot of this stuff is all this kind of competitive advantages thing. It's great to be able to talk about the Facebook stuff. But so we're working with what is actually a jobs board company, an online jobs board company, and they are designing a personal information management service, which is a career management service. So using my information about what my education is, my work experience is, I can choose who I share that with. I can look at what the career market looks like. I can work out what I need to do to get the job that I want to get, what education I need to have, what experience I need to have to get the job that I aspire to. And then I can share that information with the companies I want to work with, all under my control, to actually apply for jobs that are coming up, and I can see what jobs are coming up that are actually really relevant to me because I've shared my information freely. So in there's an information sharing relationship that's fair and transparent, but in there's huge value for that jobs board company to help me find the right job. So there's business models around what I would pay for that service. There's also bigger and better business models for them with their business partners to actually find better jobs for people and match people, especially when you get into this world where people have got multiple jobs and there's 0-hour contracts and all this sort of stuff. People are very flexible now. So it's a massive business opportunity. Additionally, creating this trusted information sharing relationship and these types of services is not a simple and straightforward thing to do. It's simple and straightforward in its experience. You can design it, but making it into something that's systemic in your business and systematic and can be scaled at pace takes some thinking through and takes some work. And some of the companies we're working with on GDPR are doing that. Mm-hmm. Once they get to that point, they will have such a big competitive advantage because it will take other businesses so long to get there. They will be trusted. They will have relationships with customers that are beyond what their competitors can give. They will be able to add huge amounts more value. They will keep those customers. It will be very difficult for their competitors to actually then interrupt that relationship. And there will be a number, we're working with a number of big brands that are going to come out swinging on this, and they will have a huge competitive advantage.
Barry, I don't know when you wrote this, but I suspect it was some time ago, but Barry says, aren't we really talking about true transparency here? Correct data mitigation and responsibility with folks' data and no more terms and conditions instead of trust. Instead, we'd have trust and behaviours. I think that largely mirrors what all three of you have been saying in different ways, with not that we're into seconds now rather than minutes to go.
Okay, so let me take one question on the Slido screen that I can actually answer. Who asked about Solid at MIT?
Yeah.
Where's that? Where's the hand?
There.
Right back there. Okay, so here's a web search for you. Check for WebBox and check the date. And you will see that some of the people on this stage were involved in that process before it was a wee glint in Sir Tim's eye, and we took it to Sir Tim, and it's now become the Solid project. Yes. So yes, I think a few of us know about that one.
MC spent 10 years at MIT. And actually, if you want to keep the conversation going with MC, we might just flick on to the next slide there because we've got a QR code for her roadmap. If you could just knock it on there. Oh, there we go.
Take a picture.
We'll go back one,
Oh, God.
So if any of you have a QR code reader on your phone, you can get to the document this way. So it's something you can comment on and edit and feed into the work that the Meaningful Consent Project have been working on.
That's
I'll keep
to
it up
that
there
roadmap,
for a few
yeah,
more
please,
seconds. And for
please.
those of you who are more of the write it down with a biro generation like myself, we're going to put up a screen grab of the actual URL, and you can take a photograph of that.
There was just that short little Google URL.
Short? Are you joking me? It was about
No,
4
this
lines
thing is 600 miles long. That's just... I'm so sorry about that. Don't
There we
try
go.
to write
Take a
that down.
photograph.
Just
You can
email me. Remember I
punch it
said
in.
about pain? Just email mc@nopain2.org. How do you remember that? It's easy. No pain, no pain.
No pain squared.
Yes.
We're going to be thrown off the stage in a second, but I just want to ask, how far do you all think we are from getting to that place where we change the narrative, we build in the trust that people expect, we give them control so that they can customize their own experience, and therefore we change the narrative from the risks of data sharing to the benefits of data sharing? We'll go 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, go on.
Go ahead, Liz.
No, you go first, because
No.
I think I'm going to say something quite different.
Well, if the government in the UK and in the US are still putting money into funding research projects to try and address this, we're nowhere near a solution.
Right, so how...
Because if there was a solution ready there yet, this is why Liz is still having this opportunity of competitive advantage. This is why you're still having design jams, is because this is still such a messy, messy place to be going. And there are still, we haven't even touched on the fact that there are huge interests at stake that really don't want the status quo to
Do you know
change.
what, okay, so can I just, because I know we're going to run out of time. So I don't think there's an answer. There's a route map. There's a road to drive down. Yeah. So exactly. So you know, when we invented cars, we didn't invent all the things that keep us safe, and in fact, we are inventing more and more things that keep us safe. You know, now we've got collapsible dashboards and roll cages and seat belts and da-da-da-da. You know, we didn't have those. We didn't have windscreens. We didn't have indicators. We didn't have brakes at one point. So, you know, we have moved forward.
We didn't have seat belts, 5 of us in the back of the
We haven't had the catastrophes, but actually over time, I'm very excited about it, because I think most businesses really want to be in this trusted space, and they are putting money into and investing in being in this trusted space. And in doing that, they are really making progress. They are really making progress, and big things are happening, which mean they are going to have to make progress. Their business models are broken, and loads of data assets are about to hit the market with things like GDPR, Payment Services Directive, and open banking. This stuff is going to be live data. PSD2, live data out of our bank accounts will be available through APIs. You know, that data makes everybody go a bit shivery sometimes, but we've got to be trusted in using that data, and we've got to design these things, and people are out there doing it.
For me, I think we're just at the beginning of this, and particularly as we look at services that we will experience off-screen, which are happening increasingly frequently and far more cheaply too. Just this week, Amazon basically normalized talking to a computer with their kind of Amazon wand that you can buy for $20. So I think but the opportunity to think about how you understand what's happening or can be empowered about how a service is using and your relationship to it off screen is something that we have not touched on at all during this panel, and it's coming, it's already here.
That's the whole thing about getting to Internet of Things.
But I think that, anyway, I think we're at the beginning, and there's a lot to shape and a lot of work to do.
Desperate.
But it's important work, so it's great to be with this today.
So if I were to sum it up, not so much a consensus view as a bit of a mixed bag. Any day now, starting on this end of the
part of the journey,
the line, and not for ages would be how I'd see your take on it.
I'm just going into the protect the squishy bits now.
I think the answer is, for me, we might have windscreens soon, or maybe some brakes on the car, but we'll never. You know, it's going to be a long time before we've got roads, traffic lights, roundabouts, seat belts, everything. It's going to be a long time.
Changed the status quo in any large-scale industry over the past 100 years has been some massive event. Enough car crashes, enough deaths from lung cancer, enough things falling out of the sky. We can't, the problem with this space is it's very difficult to see where the harm is. And we're a culture that motivates big change based on harm. So the GDPR is anticipating some kind of harm, but that's my really pessimistic prediction, that until we see a real harm happen, we're going to be nudging along as opposed to massively
what we're about to get is much more transparency. And, you know, Snowden created a fairly big upward draft in this market, causing us to rethink, I think a lot of people to rethink. So, you know, as we get more transparency, there will be more opportunity to call it out. So, you know, when that starts happening, it might not be catastrophic, although I can also see that there may be some catastrophes. But people will be able to call it out. And that's a kind of self-fixing ecosystem. I hope, that's what I'm hoping. Consumers will be inside, not outside the ecosystem, and they will be able to start calling it out, and then we'll be able to start fixing things. And that's exciting. Don't get too defensive, it's exciting.
Glass half full, lads. Glass half full. Well, look, as we draw to a close here and we head into the final run, like I say, that bag of crisps and sandwich that was made sometime yesterday is now within reach. I'd like to thank my panel, MC Shrafel from the University of Southampton, Sarah Gold from Projects by IF, and Liz Brandt from Control Shift. I'm Niamh Sweeney. Thanks very much for being with us today, and thank you. Okay.